So maybe you've heard someone talking about or you've read up about an anti-inflammatory diet and you're not too sure if you should be following one or looking into it, or whether it's just another fad, or whether it's actually something you need to apply to your diet. So I thought today we talk about an anti-inflammatory diet and whether it's really important or not. So I think the important thing we need to do is really just first look at inflammation and understand inflammation. A lot of people get frightened by the word of inflammation and then just want to make sure that there's none of it in the body because it's bad. However, acute inflammation is really important. So acute inflammation is actually one of the immune system's responses to injury or damage to the body's tissue, for example. So it sends out protective agents, it eliminates damaging agents from the body to actually help with the healing. So it's inherently actually really important to have a certain amount of inflammation in the body. However, when this acute inflammation isn't cleared out of the body effectively, we call that chronic inflammation, where there's this low grade, silent, continuous damage of tissue and cells in the body. So yes, acute inflammation is necessary, we need it, but a chronic inflammation is where the problem comes in. This is where we want to make sure we're getting rid of that excess inflammation in the body, because chronic inflammation, according to research, has been shown to have quite detrimental effects on your health. And also diseases. So there's a lot of research now emerging and showing that certain foods are anti-inflammatory, in other words, they decrease inflammation, and certain foods may be pro-inflammatory, in other words, they increase inflammation. And by decreasing your pro-inflammatory foods and increasing anti-inflammatory foods, that is basically then following an anti-inflammatory diet. Okay, so now we have inflammation out of the way. We know that we need to make sure we're not having chronic low-grade inflammation in the body. So let's look at certain foods that has been shown by research that may actually have an impact on inflammation, whether it's anti or pro-inflammatory. So first one we want to look at is carbohydrates. So carbohydrates, unfortunately has already had a bad reputation or gotten a bad reputation over the past few years. But it is important to know that carbohydrates are super important for fuel, for fiber, and it also makes up a big component of our diet. However, we want to make sure that we are consuming the right types and the quantity of carbohydrates. Because we see that if we're having high GI, highly refined carbohydrates, in other words, those typically carbohydrates that are easily released into the bloodstream, like for example your white bread or things like pizza or cake or those typical nicer types of carbohydrates, it actually increases the sugar levels in the blood. Hyperglycemia is what we call increased sugar levels, may then lead to increase in pro-inflammatory agents like cytokines and also free radicals, which has been shown to increase cancer. So that chronic higher sugar levels because of sugar intake or refined carbohydrates that are high in GI is actually not a good option. So yes, we definitely want to opt for your lower GI whole grain carbohydrates, like for example brown rice or quinoa, or things like your legumes like chickpeas and lentils, and your starchy vegetables like sweet potato, beetroot, and so forth, instead of leaning heavily on your processed carbohydrates. If you're doing something like bread, low GI bread is a better option than just going for a normal bread. We also see with higher sugar levels, this leads to higher insulin levels, and we've spoken about the effect of that on your fat storage and weight loss, of course. But in this case, we see that higher insulin levels actually has an impact on the enzymes responsible for converting certain fats into their anti-inflammatory agents or components, and so they're not as anti-inflammatory as we'd want them to be. So this leads me on to the second group, which is fat. So a lot of us know that omega-3 is anti-inflammatory and omega-6 is pro-inflammatory, and we need to make sure that we are consuming omega-3 in the diet. So yes, healthy fats are super important, and it's one of the main components of an anti-inflammatory diet. So we need to have omega-6 and 3 in the diet, even though 6 is pro-inflammatory, and we usually look at them in a ratio, so omega-6 to 3 in a ratio of between 10 to 1, or even they've shown with research that a ratio of 5 to 1 has been shown to have positive impacts on health in general. So in other words, there's still going to be more omega-6 present than omega-3, and this is mainly because of the sources of omega-6 and 3. So omega-3 is not as commonly consumed, unfortunately, because it's not very commonly in a lot of foods. So in other words, if you look at the food groups or sources, that would be fish in general, but specifically your mackerel, sardines, pilchards, even tuna, and also then your plant sources would be walnuts or flax seeds. However, walnuts or flax seeds, unfortunately, their omega-3 isn't as effectively converted to the active form in a lot of people, unfortunately. So it is important to just note that you might be needing an omega-3 supplement. Then, if we look at omega-6, that is things like avocado, nuts, seeds, olive oil, olives, and anything that has those foods in them, which is quite a lot of food. So we are typically having a lot of omega-6 and not a lot of omega-3. So if you think you are maybe lacking in omega-3, maybe look at taking a fish oil or krill oils supplement. That is definitely only omega-3 and not 6 and 3. So yes, we've seen that with fats, omega-3 is specifically helpful in decreasing inflammation. The next group is actually polyphenols, and this is just a fancy word for the components, especially in your fruits and vegetables, that have a very protective effect on the body. You think about the flavonoids, that's what they call them, or even the tannins and that type of thing in the foods. And that's typically the colors and the vitamins and minerals and fiber and things that we find naturally in fruits and vegetables that has been shown to decrease inflammation and also increase antioxidants in the body. So that's also super important. The last one I want to talk about is caloric intake. So it's not a food specifically, but in general, our diet and how many calories we're consuming. So we see that when we are consuming an excessive amount of calories and we actually not expending a lot because we're very sedentary or not exercising enough, we see that there's an increase in fat storage in the body. So yes, that's not great for the scale, but unfortunately we see that increased fat, we call adipose tissue, is a metabolically active is metabolically active in the body, which means that it actually releases inflammation in the body. So the fat that's sitting there is not just sitting there and making you heavier, it's actually increasing inflammation in the body. So we see that people that are overweight actually have a chronic low-grade inflammation due to that adipose tissue. So making sure you are managing your calorie intake and not increasing your fat amount in your body, or the adipose tissue in your body, is actually also positive for your anti-inflammatory diet. So the most common anti-inflammatory diet that is out there is called the Mediterranean diet. And the Eat Fit eating plans that we have for you on the website are based on the Mediterranean diet lifestyle or principles. And this is basically just looking at more leaner types of proteins like chicken and fish, and not a lot of red meat, as well as your seasonal fresh fruits and vegetables, and your healthy fats like olive oil, your nuts, seeds, avocado, and so forth. And whereas this is very much in a stark contrast to the Western diet, where it's heavily processed foods with a lot of red meat or processed meats and refined carbohydrates. So just think about that. It's more like a fresh approach to your diet plan, almost like a cleaner approach if you think about it, is the Mediterranean style, where there's a little bit more of your fresher seasonal types of ingredients with leaner meats in there as well. So Mediterranean diet has been shown to be very effective in reducing inflammation and also by benefiting health in general. The last point I want to make is not just when we're looking at inflammation, it's not just about the food, but actually the way that we eat the food as well. So we've seen that being mindful and eating slowly has actually been shown to decrease cortisol levels in the body. And we've spoken about cortisol before, but that's basically a stress hormone, which has also been shown to increase inflammation. So yes, we want to make sure that we're having the right types of foods in the diet, but the way we eat them, by eating slowly, chewing your food properly, and really just being mindful, in other words, you're not being distracted and you're really listening to your body, has been shown to actually also have an impact on inflammation. So the long and the short is basically, yes, we do want to make sure that we are following a more anti-inflammatory diet for health benefits, not just necessarily if you have a disease already, but just in general to be healthy. It is a better option to go to the anti-inflammatory route where you can. But it is very important to note you need to do something that's sustainable for you, and try to implement certain of these principles, even if it's not all of them, because they all work together in the long term. So I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions, please let us know. You can send us a WhatsApp or an email. And hopefully you've learned something about this, about the anti-inflammatory diet. And then we'll see you again.